broke my own rule and mutated the first symptom manually because it costed 0 points. That symptom is required to get the infection to spread, and like all diseases, it can mutate new abilities on its own. But because of how many people the vampires killed, God sent soldiers armed with silver bullets to eliminate the threat before they even came close to enslaving humanity. The next go around, I went back to basics with everyone's favorite bacteria. Being the starting disease, the bacteria is basically the jack of all trades, master of none disease. It's average. It's the vanilla ice cream of extinction level events. Random mutations, as I mentioned a few sentences ago, are not limited to viruses exclusively. I was actually surprised at how many people were infected, including some hard-to-reach countries like Madagascar and Greenland. 4 billion infected with only 11,000 dead, especially with a death rate that ground to a halt, is pretty good, but most of the damage had been done. The disease police were called and arrested everyone at the party. The 2 tests were a massive waste of time. 2020 is the time of the fungus. I just had to create the right conditions for it to awaken from its slumber, and by that, I mean I postponed the challenge again to unlock the fungus by beating the game with the virus the normal way. Evolving and shit. I lost. The Caribbeans secluded themselves from the fun, and as a punishment for surviving, they're all alone in the world. Then that world was destroyed. I got my fungus. I should have named it Pubert. But we all make mistakes. My parents made a big one about 24 years ago. The cheesy one, as it would come to be called by future generations, is a beautiful fungus. The fungus's special little party trick is that it can sacrifice one of its hosts by making them materialize in a random country seconds before they explode. That extreme exaggeration probably didn't explain anything. The ability the fungus has is Spore Burst, allowing you to infect a country with a plague. Whether that's random or you choose the country, I'm not entirely sure. You have that ability because the cheesy one is not a fan of traveling. It's difficult for a spore to travel great distances. The right hemisphere took the brunt of the exposure to the fungus, with it starting in Saudi Arabia and whatnot. Once it got to a country, it spread like a motherfucker. But waiting for it to cross that transatlantic barrier is like waiting for a baby to cook Thanksgiving dinner. With enough time, it could probably do it. With the cheese down for the count, I tried the simian flu again. Literally nobody died. It was probably the biggest slap in the face I've ever gotten by something that was completely my fault. It was around that time I began to realize that this would be more difficult than I anticipated. Who'd have guessed that trying to win a game by doing nothing would not be easy? But as they say, Plague Inc. is a perfectly balanced game with no exploits. And I mean that almost literally. I don't know if there are any exploits, but there are benefits that can be earned in the game in the form of modifiers to your disease's genetic code. Or, if you don't want to spend 10 hours playing this game, you can buy your way to victory. Todd Howard finally won me over and convinced me to purchase microtransactions. I gave in to temptation and spent somewhere around $20 on this fucking game. I haven't hated myself this much since I turned myself into a pickle. With the full extent of my power now unlocked, for 2 low payments of $9.99, I could modify the genetic code at its base level to suit my needs. Only 5 can be active at any time, and they're confined to their own categories. You can't pick any 5. The first one deals with DNA and DNA bubbles and is worthless. The second can make the illness more likely to spread via various modes of travel. The third is also effectively worthless as it relates to evolving new symptoms. Fourth is a big one, as it can increase or decrease the likelihood of a random mutation, make the disease harder to cure, or let it mutate abilities or transmissions at the cost of being easier to cure. The fifth can give bonuses to different environments. The fourth group is what I considered to be the best. Being able to gain abilities could be a game changer. A cure can only be developed so quickly, so with the abilities, any illness could potentially destroy the planet. Sparkle 11 began in India with the Aerocyte, Genetic Mimic, and Extremophile genetic code modifiers. For the first attempt on a new platform, it did pretty okay. Work on a cure started at around the 1.5 billion infected mark, and about 1.5 million people ultimately died before I cancelled that dimension. Sparkle 12 was uneventful. I swapped out Genetic Mimic for Darwinist to make the virus even more likely to randomly mutate. With more possible mutations in a given period of time, it's more likely for an ability to be one of the mutations gained. Sparkle 13 showed me that with the power of money, there was nothing that couldn't be done. For the first time, 7 billion people were infected with the disease, and more than 100 million people successfully died. The world was my oyster, just waiting to be ripped open and destroyed for the treasure in its core. Sparkle 14 began her life in America and was as American as apple pie and obesity. Every single soul on the planet was infected with my virus, and because fewer than 400 people died, the cure wasn't even 20% of the way done yet. Victory seemed assured. All I needed were a few hardcore symptoms that caused a lot of damage, and all would succumb to my Sparkle. It didn't happen. She came closer than any Sparkle had before. More than 2/3 of the entire species died, but it was still not enough. 15 was alright, nothing special. I ended 16 not long after Madagascar shut down its liquid borders. 17 infected a solid amount of people, but it was obvious that victory was impossible. So just for a bit of fun, I suspended time and spent 300 DNA points just to see how many people I could kill with the cure being 100% finished. I erased about 900 million people in a little under 3 weeks. That's something to be proud of. Then, another bold decision. Recall some minutes ago when I said 2 easy payments of $9.99. One was for the genetic modifiers, but the other was to unlock the remaining disease types. Sparkle X is on the scene and shit is about to get real. With the power of genetic modifiers and the swag that naturally comes from being a fungus, a swift victory was within sight. I've never been more wrong in my life. I'm not entirely sure why, but this fungus took so goddamn long to spread. After 27 real minutes and more than 8 fake years, I had infected 6,900 million people. Nobody who mattered died, and a cure was nowhere to be found. But I play the long game, so I sat, waiting patiently for something to happen. Slowly, the development of a cure gained steam, and after years of being infected with the greatest fungus of all time, it was wiped from the face of the earth. The X in Sparkle X stands for experimental, which was why I tried my hand at a parasitic pandemic next. The parasite's gimmick is that it is inherently more severe, and DNA points can only be gained by popping bubbles. It infected a decent number of people, but it was fairly clear to me that the parasite would not deliver me my gold medal. X3 was a nanovirus. The nanovirus is quite a bit more infectious from the beginning due to it accidentally being released from a lab. The trade-off being that work on a cure starts immediately. I'm sure you can see why that is not ideal for this challenge. I decided to get a bit crazy and make X8 a bioweapon. It reached a tipping point at 1 billion infected, where more people were dying than being infected. The cure was unnecessary. The weapon wiped out everyone who was sick. With X5, I tried the parasite again. 6.8 billion infections later, I lost. Then came the failsafe. I spent even more money buying all the remaining content I didn't have. X6 was a zombie virus. The thing about the zombie apocalypse is that it doesn't matter how many people are infected if none of them turn into zombies. I didn't want to do this, but none of the other diseases worked. It was time for the Neurax worm. This exciting parasite burrows into your brain and makes you think it's your god. The worm was so incredibly slow. He took like 25 minutes to infect everyone. It mutated a few times, but it didn't have much to mutate to. Upside was, nobody gave a shit about the worm screaming in their head. Everyone went about their day, and once almost everyone became infected, the mutations began to pile up. The number of deaths slowly started to increase day after day, week after week, 1,000 here, 1,000 there, and still no cure. The race against the clock would not be won this time. The cure was made and distributed, but I saw my opportunity. Sparkle X8 brought back the worm, and it was just as slow as it was the first time. No exponential growth, no hyperlethal symptoms, no diarrhea, just a good time for everyone involved. At 12 minutes in, the population of Earth had been infected, and the waiting game began. A couple mutations occurred with no real consequence. Then, the world saw the light when the despair symptom mutated. Thousands of people, then tens of thousands of people were dying every day. On May 28, 2028, with 5 million dead and billions more infected, the perfect symptom mutated. Suicide. Everyone on the planet would be driven by the primal urge to end their life. In the time it takes you to blink your eyes, 1 million people would die. Those who resisted the soothing words of their inner worm worked on a cure. But at around 69%, work on a cure began to stagnate. The number of people dead was approaching 7 billion. Soon, fewer than 100 million people remained, then 50 million, then 10 million, then 1 million, then 100,000, then 10,000, then 1,000, 100, 10, and life on Earth was successfully eradicated without spending any DNA points. And that's going to do it for this video about whether or not you can beat Plague Inc. without spending any DNA points. If you enjoyed the video or learned anything, leave a like. Leave a dislike if you didn't enjoy the video or didn't learn anything. Thanks to the Champion tier supporters as well as other channel members for making videos like this one possible. Join the Mitten Squad Discord server through a link in the video description. Follow me on Twitter at Mitten Squad. My name is Paul of Mitten Squad. Have a wonderful day. Skyrim has a lot of magic in it. Shouts, alteration, galvanization, restoration, approximation, conjuration, destruction, illusion, and more. Most of these are designed to be offensive, to do direct damage to an enemy, but there's one school of magic that is used almost exclusively for healing and preserving life. Can you beat Skyrim with only restoration spells? I started Skyrim, wasn't at the 35th annual Tamriel Wagon Gymnastics competition, picked an Imperial as my race because they're the only race that starts with a 25 in restoration. Named myself something that a certain someone in a certain mouse movie Discord refuses to say to me, and entered Helgen Keep. There are a few good things that happen right off the bat. First, you always start with healing, a restoration spell. That was actually the only good thing. I very briefly let a few soldiers use my body as a sword punching bag, picked locks, ignored buckets because what kind of weird nasally freak would collect buckets, and escaped into Skyrim from within Skyrim itself. The issue now becomes, how the hell do you deal damage to anything with a restoration spell? In the base game, you don't, not really. If you don't have any of the DLCs installed, this run becomes stupid difficult. The best you'll be able to do is get restoration up to level 90 and somehow acquire the Bane of the Undead spell, which sets undead up to level 44 on fire and makes them flee for 30 seconds. But not everything you face is undead. In fact, nothing you face is even alive because this is a fucking video game. Nice, thanks. As luck would have it, there is a single restoration spell in Skyrim that can damage living and unliving target persons. That can damage both living and unliving targets, without having to resort to calling them mean names. Poison Rune, an adept level spell that does 3 points of poison damage over the course of 30 seconds. If your IQ is on par with a number of drawing sticks and a box of crayons, you may be thinking that it doesn't count because it's poison damage, to which I say, go fuck yourself. The game calls it a restoration spell, so it's a restoration spell. As I haven't played Elmo's Number Journey yet, the problems are seemingly infinite. The most important one, in the only time zone that matters, is that it requires restoration at 50 to be able to use it. In the last few explanatory paragraphs, I've likely activated the Mage Stone to make magic skills level up quicker, discovered Bleak Falls Barrow, and begun taking punishment from the bandits. I did that for a while, but it was too slow. Like the great Billy Mays once said, there's gotta be a better way. And there is. Tucked away in desolation lies the location you've probably never heard of. Once I say the name, even the most fanatical Skyrim fans will be asking themselves, what the fuck is he talking about? High Hrothgar. That's what us liars refer to as a joke. I couldn't take the front doors into the temple. The old men have locked themselves away while they examine each other's backs for moles and count wrinkles. Getting over the temple and into the courtyard is as simple as bending your ankles until you hear something snap, and running up the mountain with your bare feet that are effectively pool noodles wearing boots. Abscond from the mountain climbing adventure and the fun can begin. The Wall of Cold is what we're after, as it can be used to quickly level up restoration. Because there are no enemies here, besides the old men in their robes watching me from the shadows, you can take damage from the cold, heal yourself until you run out of magic, wait an hour for it to come back, and do it again indefinitely. Also, I have clothing that makes magic regenerate 50% faster. I was here for a while, but not as long as I originally thought I would be. My restoration was somewhere around 27 when I arrived, and after 30 minutes of doing what I just described, it was up to 45. I'd taken the relevant perks that I could as I leveled up. I'd tell you what they were, but to be honest, I don't think you deserve to know. You haven't earned it. After those 30 minutes were up, I ascended down the mountain. I totally didn't fuck up the beginning of that Bioshock Infinite video and say the wrong word as a joke. got licked by a bunch of friendly puppies, stole more cabbage than I realistically should have been able to fit into wherever it was stuffed, arrived at Whiterun, sold the armor and weapons I didn't need, and spoke to the Jarl about a giant lizard. I did this because as I was recovering from and immediately giving myself frostbite atop the mountain, I remembered that I had to get to a certain point in the story before I could travel to Dragonreach Island and begin the DLC. Having restoration at 50 before that wouldn't really help me out all that much. If you're wrapped in a chain and dropped into an empty bathtub to drown, a snorkel won't save you. Before setting out, I used the vegetables the local townsfolk grew for me despite not even knowing I existed to create several bowls of vegetable soup. You never know when you might need it. I'd also made sure to get a more effective healing spell from Farfield. Pretend what I said before didn't happen. Watching the footage back without remembering everything and making inferences about my reasons for doing things sometimes leads to me lying. Not that I would ever lie to you. My first attempt in using the superior healing spell to heal myself resulted in my demise. As one would expect, because I didn't believe I could survive. Like that ghoul fridge kid from Fallout 4. He didn't live because Bethesda is shit, he survived because he knew that he could. He lived because Todd Howard believed in him, and Todd Howard believes in you too. I kept grinding away until I got restoration up to 50. It only took like 10 minutes. It goes without saying that I'd been playing on Adept. Not only was it the level of the spell I was after, it made the cold do more damage in a shorter amount of time so I could heal while standing in it without my health going up too quickly or dying in the process. But I backhanded that bitch back down to Novice where it belonged and entered Bleakfall's Barrow to retrieve the Dragonstone. Ripley's Believe It or Don't tells us that it's not too difficult to get through this temple without attacking anything. Consider it a trial run for what's to come. With my magic as high as it is, my dual-wielding glowing hands, and the difficulty setting, enemies are more like bumblebees swarming an elephant than any sort of a threat to me. Getting the golden claw from Arvel Not So Swift isn't difficult either. He can be cut down without attacking any creatures, and the feral ratatouilles destroy him when given the opportunity. Traps don't count, and can be used to turn anything that you can think of into Swiss cheese. The Draugr Overlord requires some baiting though. That could be sexual. There's another trap he must be led to. Firebag got his ass a bit, but the swing set swords finished him off. I got the Dragonstone, returned to Far Cry, and witnessed the news of a dragon attack. Luckily for them, I was there to do nothing about it. That's not entirely true. I went out to the farm to collect more cabbages grown in my honor when someone approached me, which was weird since they were standing still and I was the one walking. Out of curiosity, I told him I had cabbages to sell, thinking to trick the idiot because his mouth bothered me. He stole my fucking cabbages. Suffice it to say, I knew my only option was to kill him, and who I can only assume was his wife. I liked watching her blood-soaked body seize on the ground next to my cabbage cribs. I reloaded a save to ensure that didn't count, went to the watchtower, saved the day by doing my best vegetable impression. Proventus said there was no proof I was the Dragonborn. Obviously he had to pay for that. I got stabbed a bunch and flopped on the ground, ignored the donkey girl, and answered the summons of the Greybeards. I had to yell at Arnold to continue the quest. He took some damage from it, I think. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be. Probably shouldn't have made fun of blind people in my last video. They learned me new words good. I listened and speak their words and ran fast at gate. Before tracking down the horn of Harold Hornholder, I rode to Winterhold, failed Farrell's test because I don't know how to spell, bought a book from Farthington, and got inside the College of Winterhold. The idea being that I could either find someone to pay to raise my restoration skill, or maybe I could get a useful spell from someone inside. After this guy holding nothing told me to piss off, I pretty much gave up on that idea. Rode to Dawnstar and made my way towards Ustengrav. Ustengrav is easier than my sister. Keep your hands in front of your face, pretend you aren't being hit, and you can get through this ordeal without any problems. That's probably something I should not have said. There isn't any kind of boss at the end of this dungeon, besides trying to read Delphine's handwriting. With the horn in my possession, I returned to High Hrothgar to return it. Then I remembered that I didn't actually have it, and went to Delphine's inner basement to get it back. But then the cultists attacked. I did my part to stop the borderline terrorist attack by basically standing in place and putting a bunch of band-aids on my arm. I gave back the golden claw, rented a room. Delphine weaseled the horn out of her hidden crevice. I stole her stuff because I can. What's hers is mine, what's mine is mine. It's The Walking Dead Season 8, subtitled All Out War when you cross that line. With the cultists' orders having been read by yours truly, I rode a cart to Windhelm, swam to a boat, and arrived in Solstheim. The man I was after was in the southeast of the island, which is why I marked southwest on my map and headed there. I absolutely did not read the word wrong. My level of reading comprehension is so far below your own that I blew past negative infinity and lapped your bitch ass. See you at the finish line, loser. Shortly after coming centimeters away from dying at the hands of sentient chocolate milk mix, I realized that I went west when I should have gone east, and found a city carved out of giant mushrooms that are in no way phallic. This Tylenol Febreze guy is the guy who sometimes sells the poison rune spell I was after, but he wouldn't open his shop to me. His science fair experiment was supposed to come to life and wreak havoc all over the mushroom, yet for some reason it wouldn't happen. So I searched his house for clues, dropped valuable materials down the float hole, tried to throw a basket backwards over my head into the hole, did it, tripped into the hole, and went back outside to discover that he was the reason for the season. He produced a fine powder from somewhere and wished on a falling star for it to come to life. That's why it's a sort of white color and clumpy. It occurred to me rather quickly that I had no means of killing this thing. I couldn't blow it into the water with my mouth because the very act could damage it. There was only one way to proceed. I would need an inanimate object worth next to nothing. I needed a donkey. Having a companion kill it would obviously not count, but there is a trick that can be used to get around this little issue. Take Lydia to the scene of the crime that has yet to be committed, dismiss her from your service, and she's no longer a companion. She's just a normal essential NPC. Essential being a label the game uses for NPCs that can't die. As she takes her leave, she engages in combat with the Ash Monster. I didn't make it happen. I didn't make those cars hit each other. I just covered the intersection with ice to ensure something funny would happen after I left. Lydia is about as terrible as I expected. She could only take a few bonks before falling. For a while, I just waited until she got back up, which was harder than I would have thought because of how potent the Ash's dust spray attack was. Eventually it hit me that I could just use the Healing Hand spell to keep Lydia in the fight for longer periods of time. And after the longest 7 minutes in the history of minutes, Lydia defeated the beast. Tafgar thanked me, and I bought